past few weeks, I have been absolutely obsessed with XCOM 2. I also won't be the first to tell you that XCOM 2 is great. Many others have already done that, but yet I was surprised to the degree that I enjoyed the title. I had held off on purchasing the game for years due to my experience with the previous entry, XCOM Enemy Unknown. I had enjoyed Enemy Unknown, yet something about it just didn't grab me. I have several dozen hours where I tried to finish the game, yet despite my attempts, never made it to the end screen. I revisited the original after a 2-campaign stint with the sequel to see if I was wrong as a younger man, yet that feeling still remained. I was having fun, but it couldn't get its hooks in me, couldn't convince me to push through to the end. So I returned back to XCOM 2 and I immediately became enraptured again, leaving me bewildered as to how I could enjoy the sequel so much without respecting the original. After some thought, I came to the conclusion that not only is XCOM 2 a great standalone game, it's a great sequel as well. Which seems redundant. The game does have a 2 in the name, but some titles do better in the context of their past forms, and some do worse. A great game does well on its own merits, but a great sequel must overcome a precedent. The most obvious place to start is content. A sequel with more content can significantly improve an experience, and at this point in the industry, more content is simply expected in a sequel. More levels, quests, weapons, enemies, vehicles, and abilities are an easy way to improve an experience from its predecessor. The first game was already great, and simply more of it should surely make for a great sequel. However, the key word there is already. If the original XCOM didn't hold my attention, why would more of the same change that? This suggests why more content isn't always the answer. For example, Borderlands 3 doubles down on the bigger is better philosophy. In the third, well, maybe fourth or fifth entry, you go from exploring Pandora to an entire galaxy of worlds, with dozens of additional legendary weapons and new enemy types to be found around every corner. If more content makes a great sequel, then Borderlands 3 would be a remarkable game and significantly better than its predecessors. Yet the shadow of the legendary Borderlands 2 still looms over the third entry, with many players still preferring the second game over the third, despite Borderlands 3 having objectively more content. I love Borderlands 3 and believe it to be a great game, but many players, including myself, would not say it is a great sequel. Borderlands 3 lost existing fans of the franchise while failing to capture a significant number of people trying it out for the first or second time. More content doesn't equate to a great sequel. Now, of course, XCOM 2 adds more content, and it's a totally new campaign, more enemies, new soldier abilities, mission types, and even more. However, this additional content isn't what pushed me to love XCOM 2. It has to be something more fundamental to how the game was designed. So, what does XCOM do right? Well, a great sequel does two things. It captures the essence of the original while also implementing meaningful evolutions to the existing formula. By capturing the essence of the original game, a great sequel will maintain its fans from the first game that want to see more of what they loved in the original. However, to draw in more players who didn't click with the previous games, like myself with XCOM, you need to make meaningful evolutions to the formula to draw them back in. Even existing fans may grow bored with more of the same. So, what is the essence of a game? For a game to feel like a sequel, it needs to capture what made the original great. This doesn't mean that it copies the original, only that it gives players the experience they enjoyed the first time around. A great sequel identifies why the original was popular and pulls the game's resources closer to that core strength. It builds on what made its predecessor a hit. For Titanfall, that is the mobility and Titan versus pilot dynamic. For Borderlands, that is the crazy RPG loot and abilities combined with a dark and comedic narrative. And for XCOM, it's the challenging tactical missions and long-term campaign strategy. So, let's start with Titanfall 2. The original's core strength is the freedom of movement. You play as a pilot, a small, nimble warrior, gliding across the map as an acrobat of death. Respawn recognized the movement mechanics as the core strength of the original and then made changes in the sequel to improve upon it. The addition of the grappling hook to gain momentum quickly and the slide mechanic to maintain this momentum are two obvious examples of this. Other smaller changes also showed this, like buffing the movement speed of the stim ability to give players that extra rush of speed when using it, or added map verticality giving the extra oomph to the third dimension of combat that the Titanfall series offers. These additions and small changes are evidence of Respawn recognizing the strengths of Titanfall and specifically playing towards what made the original great, without simply copy-pasting. Sometimes capturing the essence can be done just by adding additional mechanics, but often larger changes will be made to existing ones. This can be seen with the many changes made to Titans. The Titans are there to accent the mobility of pilots. They are massive death machines, but of limited mobility and can be beaten by a nimble pilot that takes the right approach. However, Titans are not the default gameplay, they are the exception. In fact, many players prefer playing as pilots and find playing as Titans to be a chore. Removing Titans was, of course, not an option. They are core to the game's identity, it is called Titanfall, and add a lot of depth to the gameplay. So, Respawn accounted for this in a few ways. Titans were toned down from the original game so a single good Titan player couldn't dominate the entire match. This was mostly done by changing the overshield mechanic. Originally, Titans had rechargeable shield health, a portion of their health bar that would charge back to full if the Titan avoided damage for long enough. In the sequel, they now only have a static, unhealable health bar. This allows smart pilots to slowly wear down a Titan's health as long as they play smart and out of the effective range of the particular Titan they are fighting. To compensate for this, the rodeo mechanic from the original game was also adjusted. A pilot can rodeo an enemy Titan by hopping onto it and ripping it apart, Shadow of the Colossus style. In the original, this simply did heavy damage. However, in the sequel, it was replaced by a battery mechanic. When you grab onto an enemy Titan, you steal a battery from them, dealing a hefty amount of damage, but you can then give this battery to an allied player, giving them an additional bit of HP and charge for their ultimate core ability. This gives players who enjoy playing only as pilots a more interesting purpose in these Titan engagements, and benefits both the players who like to play as Titans and who like to play as pilots. This simple change captures the essence of the original Titan versus pilot gameplay while still improving the dynamic. It emphasizes the core strength of the original, mobility, while still leaving an important place for Titans. However, certain games don't always bring over what made some fans enjoy the original, and end up losing a large part of their identity and their player base in the translation. This can be seen in the failures of Borderlands 3, which may be hard to see at first. It has dozens of guns, crazy character abilities, and all the RPG action of the previous games. In fact, the plethora of loot is even more creative in this installment, with more generous loot drops giving you a better chance at snagging these rare items. The addition of firing modes makes even common weapons feel more unique and opens up considerable design space for legendary weapons. Unique mechanics for each weapon manufacturer means that the brand of gun that you choose from the game feels more distinct and meaningful. A more customizable action skill makes character builds feel personal to the player that puts them together. And all of these changes, small and large, improve the core gameplay loop of looting and shooting. The issue here is that while Borderlands 3 captures the series' strength as an insane looter shooter, it regresses in a second core strength, its darkly comedic narrative. There was a lot of discussion on the internet over the quality of Borderlands 3's writing, and I'm not here to get into that debate, but it is sufficient to say that Borderlands 3's writing and characters don't compare to other entries in the series, notably Borderlands 2. In this way, Borderlands 3 is both one step forward and one step back, one in the direction of gameplay and the other in narrative. This may not be such an issue for the game if it wasn't for how much the narrative gets in the way of the gameplay. There are many times when you are forced to stand and have characters talk at you, stopping you from engaging with the improved gameplay. This is already a problem, but is compounded by weaker writing. I recently replayed Borderlands 3 with a friend, and the mountains of exposition thrown at you in the first few hours of the game almost convinced him to stop playing, even though he quite enjoyed the gunplay and RPG mechanics. Borderlands 3 may improve upon the gameplay of the original, but the franchise's second strength, the narrative, is worsened and even stands in the way of improvements, losing a lot of the essence of what makes a Borderlands game great. For a game like XCOM, the core strength is the tactical combat that constitutes most of the gameplay. To make the combat even more engaging, Frax has made some small, yet interesting changes. Some of these are rather obvious. Maps in XCOM 2 feature significantly more verticality, adding a third dimension to combat that players can choose to exploit. Getting to high ground gives your soldiers an aim bonus, but firing angles are limited and cover is scarce, forcing players to tread carefully to get the best use out of it. Another, rather controversial change, was the addition of turn timers. These are featured in several missions, meaning you have to reach an objective or complete the mission in a certain amount of turns. This forces players to be much more aggressive, surging forwards towards the objective and taking risks if they are to succeed. However, missions without turn timers are still present, meaning the player will have to switch their playstyle between missions for the best chance of success. This simple addition allows for two different playstyles to exist side by side, useful in different situations, therefore increasing the tactical depth of the gameplay as a whole. A shift in philosophy around player choice can also be seen. XCOM 2 is not afraid to give players tons of choices to make every single turn. From the second mission onwards, players are given significantly more tactical freedom. In the original, you were limited to medkits and frag grenades at the beginning of the game, with smoke grenades being locked behind a soldier's ability tree. In the sequel, all soldiers have access to smoke grenades and a flashbang, immediately opening a wealth of new tactical options. In fact, many abilities that were originally locked behind a soldier class, such as the battle scanner, are now items available to all soldiers. Finally, the new alien hunter weapons that you can get early on in XCOM 2 mean you always have fun, tactical options at the beginning of the game. These items are almost overpowered for how early in the game you get them, but are so much fun to use and give you a much needed advantage that I don't really care. This philosophy of tactical choice continues throughout the game, with the ammo types, special grenades, and heavy weapons giving operatives dozens of combinations to best suit the mission, truly unlocking the strategic depth of the tactical combat. While focusing and improving upon what made the original game great is important, it is only one of two aspects that must be addressed when crafting a sequel. To be a great sequel, a game must not only recapture what made the original great, but iterate upon it, truly evolve the game to make the sequel even better. These types of evolutions open up a new design space and make the sequel feel wholly distinct from its predecessor. This evolution is what keeps the sequel fresh and draws in players who didn't enjoy the original. While the core gameplay of Titanfall is quite similar, there is a massive change that brought Titanfall 2 universal praise: the campaign. Now, this addition might not count as a true evolution if it wasn't for the pure quality of this campaign. The campaign is not phoned in. It combines a fleshed out story with unique mechanics and amazing level design to make what I believe to be the best FPS campaign of the 2010s. I could make a whole video about why the Titanfall 2 campaign is great, but it is self-evident how legendary the campaign is in that FPS genre to prove its place as a true evolution. An easier mechanic to discuss is the burn card system from Titanfall 1. Burn cards were a mechanic where you selected 3 cards before the match that gave the pilot some minor bonuses, such as boosting weapon damage or reducing the time to get your Titan. You would select one before each spawn and the card would be burned, giving you the bonus but permanently deleting the card from your stores. When you died, that card was gone. You could earn more cards by completing challenges within the game. And while the mechanic was certainly unique, it presented a lot of issues. Because cards were burned on use, if you died shortly after using one, it would feel wasted and be a very negative experience. The consumable nature also meant there needed to be a large variety of cards, meaning many of them were boring, and balancing the sheer number of cards became quite difficult. Additionally, if there was a playstyle you particularly enjoyed due to a specific burn card, you couldn't consistently play that way. The need to re-equip cards after every match meant you couldn't jump right back into the action. You were forced to look through a collection of dozens of cards and select which ones you need if you want the best chance of performing well in the next match. These issues prevented burn cards from being a wholly positive system. This was replaced with a simple boost system in Titanfall 2. Rather than a deck of one-time use abilities, you have the choice between 11 different unique abilities that you have consistent access to during a match. These include the ability to place down turrets, deploy a whole party of decoys, and even rewind time to turn the tables on an opponent. These abilities could be much more powerful than the burn cards while also being easier to balance due to the limited amount of them. It also provided a place to put other mechanics from the original that were deemed too powerful, such as the infamous auto-aiming smart pistol, which became a boost with limited ammo. It also allows players to play around their boosts better, knowing they would always have access to them during a match. While the mechanic is certainly less unique, it opens up much needed design space that evolves the game in a meaningful way. Much like how Borderlands 3 couldn't wholly capture what made the original great, it also fails to evolve. This is something the series has had trouble with before, notably between Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel, but it is also on display here, now the second game in the mainline series that fails to evolve the franchise in a meaningful way. It does build on the core looter-shooter gameplay, but it never innovates or changes the formula, instead opting to take the safe route. Borderlands 3 could change a lot, particularly with the mission, encounter, and open world design to really shake up how you approach the game. It does attempt this with the crew challenge missions that can be found scattered across the open world, but these come off more as a checklist of things to do, rather than a meaningful change to how you interact with the game. The world doesn't feel alive, even in a more arcadey sense, only acting as a container for quest markers and loot drops. This lack of evolution can also be seen in Borderlands 3's narrative, which similarly fails to evolve from the previous entry. Let's highlight some of the plot points that are quite similar between the two games. You start in a desolate environment where you need to kill off a group of bandits with help of Claptrap. There's an eccentric friendly character that leads you to the bandit leader of that area. Reach Sanctuary and help the Crimson Leaders fix up the base. Find a mysterious siren that no one has seen in a while. Fight a giant robot to get a vault key. Plot twist where the villain wanted to kill the robot the whole time, so you go run after some MacGuffins in a wildlife area and a bandit camp. Then there's a big assault on the final base and a giant boss fight, where boom, there's another plot twist and it's not actually the final battle. So then you rush through another final area where you learn some more details about the villain's tragic origins while they go more and more insane, and then a final battle through a fortress of enemies where you end by fighting a final kaiju-like monster. Of course, I'm not mentioning a lot of things, as Borderlands 3's story is a lot longer and does have some great moments, but it is obvious when these two narratives are compared side by side that it all feels like it's been done before. It makes it even harder to pull this off when Borderlands 2 has one of the greatest video game villains of all time in Handsome Jack, who the Calypsos, as hard as they try, never truly live up to. Borderlands 2 and Tales from the Borderlands prove that Borderlands can have slapstick comedy and a mature plot in the same breath, but Borderlands 3 instead opted for annoying, self-referential humor, long-winded exposition, and generic action movie drama. If Borderlands 3 had perhaps been the first game in the franchise, these things may have been overlooked, or at least excused, but its unwillingness to take risks and change from the vault racing formula of every previous game, while also falling into the same traps that previous games avoided, means the game's narrative never stands on its own. Everything considered, Borderlands 3's lack of confidence to make major changes to the gameplay or narrative formula hold it back from being a great sequel. So, we come back to XCOM. How does XCOM 2 evolve the formula? Interestingly, the biggest changes aren't in the tactical combat, but in the management component and narrative. In the original, you are Earth's defender. With the backing of the world government and the resources that they provide you, you lead a large military force with both air and ground troops, as well as a massive staff of engineers and scientists. Most of the game, you're reactive to what the aliens are doing, waiting for events to occur and then responding to them as best as you can. This changes significantly in XCOM 2, where you shift from being the defender to being the aggressor. You are no longer a large defense force, rather a small band of guerrilla fighters working to take back an occupied world. This difference in narrative framing changes the stakes and sets XCOM 2 apart as a separate game, but also informs the game design and opens up significant design space. XCOM 2 debuts the Avenger, a flying airship that acts as your new seat of command. The player is now in the driver's seat, having to make conscious choices to travel the map, contacting new regions, investigating points of interest, and picking up supply drops. These decisions really matter, as choosing to pick up some extra resources may just give you enough time to build that new armor for your squad before the next mission, but by choosing to do this you neglect other options. The passive system of the original XCOM is replaced with an active and sometimes stressful decision that presses you to make hard choices both inside and outside of combat. This shift from passive to active strategy also applies to how you lose the game. In the original XCOM, you lose when too many countries leave the Council, a group of unnamed representatives from world governments that fund the XCOM project. If you neglect a council member's country, or perform poorly on missions in their country, the country will become more and more panicked and may eventually choose to leave the council and fight the aliens on their own. The loss of a council member is irreversible, and even makes the rest of the game harder. You essentially act as a global firefighter, having to put out fires in dozens of countries, and you can't be everywhere at once. This system is much different in XCOM 2. Now you lose if the alien's ultimate goal, the Avatar Project, is completed. The Avatar Project is progressed by alien facilities across the map, and by choosing to attack these facilities you delay the Avatar Project and give yourself more time to permanently stop them. However, rather than staying back and waiting to see what the aliens do, you have to take proactive action to prevent the aliens from winning. This new game-ending pressure combined with the active choices of moving around the Avenger means you are now conquering these regions yourself, taking back ground from the aliens, building up your funds, and investing in the future all at once. The player feels accomplished by going out and expanding their sphere of influence, pushing towards the next facility, a much more positive experience than permanently losing countries to the aliens. Of all the top-grossing games of 2020, only one is a new IP, Ghost of Tsushima, with most being new entries in long-standing franchises. And at first glance, this is alarming and seems to be indicative of a lack of creativity in the games industry, or at least that creativity not being rewarded. Yet games like XCOM 2 or Titanfall 2 tell me that sequels need not be maligned, and new IPs aren't necessary for creativity or innovation. XCOM 2 is the sequel of a title that is itself a reboot of a cult classic, yet additions like the War of the Chosen DLC and the Long War mod show that the franchise still has more to offer. Titanfall 2 is what introduced me to Respawn Entertainment, a developer that has quickly risen to be among my favorites, and whose DNA has bled into so many other titles, including the now blockbuster hit, Apex Legends. Perfection of an existing formula is something that should be celebrated, and often serious innovation is required to bring a franchise to its ultimate form, and multiple entries will be needed for this to be possible. So, what will an XCOM 3 or Titanfall 3 look like? Will the Borderlands franchise continue to stagnate, or will it break new ground? It may be a long time before we get to see these titles, if they ever come, but if developers can meaningfully evolve while capturing that original magic, well, that's yet to be seen. But I'm sure that we will have some great sequels to enjoy while we wait. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This is my first ever YouTube video, and it's really exciting to finally get this video out here. I have a list of video ideas a mile long, so if you enjoyed this video and want to hear more from me, please leave a like and maybe even subscribe for when my next video comes out. I did record this video when Titanfall 1 was being held hostage and I was not able to get first-hand footage, so I'd like to thank Frothy for the Titanfall 1 footage. I really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank Gamer's Little Playground for the Borderlands cutscene footage, so I didn't need to go back and spend hours recording all the cutscenes for those games. I also put some footage from IGN and Premium Games features on Titanfall 1, so thanks to those sites as well. Hopefully I'll see y'all again soon. Thank you for watching.